You know, I've lived long enough to understand that life rarely goes the way you plan it. 82 years on this earth, and I can tell you with some certainty the heart doesn't care much for rules. It never has. And what I'm about to tell you, I've never spoken aloud to anyone. Not properly. Not like this. But in my age, you stop worrying so much about what people think, and you start worrying more about what you never said. His name was Jeffrey, my best friend since we were both 17 years old, hewing up outside a grammar school in Leeds on a gray Tuesday morning. We bonded over a shared distaste for Latin class and a mutual love of cricket. 65 years of friendship. 65 years. That's longer than most marriages. Longer than some entire lifetimes. And I love Jeffrey the way you love someone who has seen every version of you. The ambitious young man, the foolish one, the grieving one, the one who nearly fell apart and didn't. Jeffrey married Margaret in 1974. I was his best man. I remember standing at the front of that little church in Harrogate, watching her walk down the aisle in a cream dress. And I thought, Jeffrey, you lucky, lucky man. She was beautiful, of course, but it wasn't her beauty that struck me. It was the way she carried herself, quietly confident, like she knew exactly who she was and had made peace with it long ago. I shook Jeffrey's hand at the altar and whispered, "You've done well, mate." And he laughed that big laugh of his and said, "I know." For years, many, many years, Margaret was simply Jeffrey's wife. She was part of the furniture of my life in the best possible sense. She'd ring me when Jeffrey forgot someone's birthday. She'd make sure I had a proper meal when I came round for Sunday dinner. When my own wife, Eleanor, passed in 2003, it was Margaret who sat with me in the kitchen at 2 in the morning, while Jeffrey dozed off in the chair, and she held my hand and didn't say a word, because she understood that some brief doesn't need words. It just needs company. Eleanor. I should tell you about Eleanor, because you need to understand that I am not a man who takes love lightly. Eleanor and I were married for 31 years. She was a school teacher, stubborn as anything, funny in that dry, understated way that takes you by surprise. I adored her. Her death left a hole in me that I genuinely believed would never close. And for a long while, it didn't. I buried myself in the garden, in books, in the quiet routines of widowhood. I didn't look for anything. It was about 4 years after Eleanor died that things began to shift. Jeffrey had been unwell. His heart, the doctor said, needed watching carefully. And so I found myself round at their house more often, checking in, helping with things, driving Margaret to appointments when Jeffrey couldn't, that sort of thing. And gradually, slowly, in the unremarkable way that important things often happen, I began to see Margaret differently. Not as Jeffrey's wife, but as Margaret, as a person in her own right. She was funny, genuinely funny, not just politely amusing. She had opinions about everything: politics, architecture, the decline of proper bread, the novels of Patrick O'Brian. She'd read more books than anyone I'd ever met. She gardened with a kind of fierce tenderness that reminded me, strangely, of my own mother. And she was lonely, I think, in the way that people who love someone who is ill become lonely, because the person they love is still there, but some essential part of the partnership has quietly changed. I want to be very clear about something. Nothing happened. I need you to understand that. Not a word was spoken out of place. Not a gesture, not a look held too long, nothing that Jeffrey could ever have seen and felt wounded by. What I'm describing is entirely interior. It lived entirely inside me, in the private country of my own mind and heart. And I kept it there. That, I think, is the part of the story that matters most. Because when you're 82, You understand something that younger people often don't, that feelings are not the same as actions. Feeling something doesn't make you a bad person. Acting on something or not acting on it, that's where character lives. That's where the real choices are made. I chose every single day, without great drama or heroism, simply to be Jeffrey's friend. That was the choice, and I'm glad of it. Jeffrey died in the autumn of 2019, a Tuesday, as it happens. I was with him. Margaret was on his other side. He went peacefully, which is what everyone says, but in this case, it happened to be true. He simply stopped, like a clock winding down. And the three of us, well, the two of us, sat there in that room for a long time afterwards, not really knowing what to do with the silence. In the months after Jeffrey's death, Margaret and I saw each other often. Grief is a strange companion. It makes you reach for the people who knew the person you've lost, because only they understand the specific shape of your sadness. We'd have tea. We'd talk about Jeffrey, all the ridiculous things he'd done, all the ways he'd driven us both mad, all the ways we missed him with a physical ache that surprised us both with its persistence. And somewhere in that time, I told her. Not everything. I didn't tell her about the years of quietly kept feeling, but I told her that I had come to care for her very deeply, that she mattered enormously to me, that I hoped, when she was ready, and if she ever wanted it, that there might be something, a companionship, a closeness that we could build together. I was shaking when I said it, which I thought was rather undignified at 79 years old, but there it is. She was quiet for a long time. She looked out the window at the garden, and then she turned to me and said, "David, I've known for years." And she smiled that calm, certain smile of hers. And she said, "I think Jeffrey knew too, and I think he would have wanted this. I don't know if that's true. I hope it is. I believe it might be, because Jeffrey was, at his core, a generous man. He loved Margaret enough to want her happy, and he loved me enough, I'd like to think, to trust me with that. Margaret and I have been together now for nearly 5 years. We don't make a fuss of it. We're 82 and 79, respectively, so there's no particular need for grand announcements. We have tea in the morning. We argue about the radio. She thinks I prune the roses too aggressively, and she's probably right. We talk about Jeffrey often, and it doesn't feel strange. It feels right, because he is part of both of us, woven into the fabric of who we are. What I'd want to say to anyone watching this, particularly if you're younger and carrying something heavy and private in the way that I carried this for so long, is that love is not a simple or tidy thing. It doesn't always arrive at the right time or in the right form. Sometimes it asks you to be patient with it. Sometimes it asks you to be braver than you feel. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, it finds a way through the most complicated of circumstances and arrives, quietly and without fanfare, at something that feels at last like home. I'm 82 years old. I've had 2 great loves in my life. I was faithful to both of them, to Eleanor while she lived, and to the friendship that Jeffrey and I built over a lifetime. I have no regrets. That's not something everyone can say, and I'm grateful for it, deeply grateful, in the way that you can only really be grateful for something when you're old enough to understand how easily it might have gone another way. Jeffrey, if somehow you can hear any of this, thank you. For the friendship, for the years, for Margaret.